Counter UAV inbound. Hardpoint locked down. Made the entire CDP proud.
Client liquidated, leaving the scene.
Hey guys, what's up? This is Insanity. Got a gameplay of Black Ops 3 on PC. I hope you enjoyed the nice little clip at the beginning, and you can tell pretty much right away that this is a RSA interdiction video. I do enjoy using the Locust and SVG-100, but I've used them plenty enough that I decided to switch things up and go for the RSA interdiction this time around. Anyway, I remember originally wanting to record a commentary for Doctor Strange a long time ago. I can't remember for what reason I kept stalling on a commentary, but I definitely have not done so. But better late than never, as they always say. So yeah, Doctor Strange, a good movie that is unfortunately reminiscent of Batman Begins and Iron Man, and feels a little too familiar for that reason, despite formally introducing the concept of magic into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which was sort of hinted at with Thor, but they consider theirs simply advanced science instead of magic. But you've probably heard jokes about Doctor Strange essentially being Magic Iron Man, and to some extent, Strange is very similar to Tony Stark, a brilliant-minded guy with an expertise in a scientific-based field who is extremely arrogant at the beginning, but is then afflicted with a life-changing event that would eventually turn him into a better person, and he becomes a superhero. But the comparisons mostly end there, as the trajectory of the character arc is different for Strange and Tony, which is arguably the more important thing when you have characters who are very similar on the surface. Whereas Tony, being confronted by the life-changing event, resolves to be a better person, Strange does not. After his life-changing incident, he becomes extremely desperate, as he is unable to work as a doctor again, and he's a huge jerk during this moment. Though Strange quickly becomes accustomed to magic, he's not a master of it, even by the end of the movie, and is shown to be clearly out of his element in many cases during fights. Tony builds his armor after taking some time to develop it, and is practically Iron Man. He's pretty much invincible besides a brief moment of vulnerability at the end due to a villain. But his words at the end that "I am Iron Man" mostly hold true. At the end of the movie, Doctor Strange seems to accept his new responsibilities for protecting the different realms and dimensions, and is much more level-headed compared to how he behaved at the beginning. Tony, on the other hand, seems to let his creation and fame get to his head, in spite of becoming more responsible and willing to protect the world. The whole inexperienced individual gets trained by an Asian-themed organization and becomes its most expert student, brings to mind Batman Begins. Although Strange isn't exactly Sorcerer Supreme, as mentioned previously, though the credits scene where he meets Thor seems to imply that he's either getting there or he's finally becoming one. A lot of Doctor Strange is derivative, even when magic is part of the equation. Though it's also an origin story, so the feeling of genericness and familiarity can't be helped, I suppose. Still, casting Benedict Cumberbatch as a good doctor was perfect. I was engrossed in his journey, and I very much like the fact that while Strange may have done everything to accelerate his studies of magic, he's a doctor, so he's still not very good at fights, even with magic as a combat tool, and much of his fighting is done through pragmatic fashion, and making good use of his mind rather than outright brute forcing. He even bemoans the fact that he ended up killing someone, despite it being in self-defense, which, considering his profession, is an interesting aspect to his character. Superheroes have no-kill policies like Superman and Batman usually base their code on their upbringing and external stimuli. Strange, on the other hand, being a doctor, would certainly give some thought and train patients with care, lest he get incriminated for medical malpractice. Benedict Cumberbatch also brings the right amount of jerkish charm to Strange, just as Robert Downey Jr. did to Tony Stark. Sure, people are probably familiar with Benedict Cumberbatch through Sherlock Holmes, but I've only seen one episode of that series at most, so my overall exposure to Benedict Cumberbatch is limited. and I like what I've seen of him from the movie. The supporting cast is pretty good, but nailing the main character is important, and Marvel has done it again. I like the visuals and overall look of these sets and costumes. It makes Doctor Strange seem different enough in spite of the story aspects being derivative. One other thing I also like was the finale, which I think is probably the best finale for a Marvel movie ever, as it involves creative use of CGI that is reversing destruction for once as opposed to being used to cause destruction, and a final confrontation that gets resolved through outwitting the enemy rather than punching them out. The finale alone is enough to push a movie from being a generic origin story to something better. There's certain things to criticize Doctor Strange about that don't involve the origin aspects. The pacing is a bit off once Strange arrives at what was it called? Oh yeah, Carmartage? Yeah. And a lot of his training feels condensed before he gets thrown into his first major battle. And really, the only thing that sort of deals with this aspect is Strange using astral projection to study magic while sleeping at night. The focus of the movie is squarely on Strange. There's not enough time to develop Mordo, who eventually becomes an antagonizing character at the end. And of course, the villain does not get enough development, barring his one big exchange with Strange, which seemingly gives way to a potentially interesting character, before quickly relegating back to a character to punch things and advance the plot. It's quite a fair bit of humor. Most of them are gag-based, and most of them generally have to do with Wong, a character who doesn't really seem to serve much purpose. The Ancient One and Mordo already have a lot of expository dialogue for one thing, and Wong also has a potentially cool moment that's stolen from him off-screen, namely that of protecting the Hong Kong Sanctorum. For a stern, serious character, he sure gets a lot of humorous moments, and as a token Asian character of any sort of significance in the plot, I'm not really sure if including him based on his portrayal was a good idea. I do like Wong's character, and hope that his future appearances make better use of him, however. But apart from the gags, a lot of his role could have easily been given to Mordo, who I feel needed more screen time to make his turn as an antagonist more fleshed out. Since this is a superhero origin story, ultimately how much slack one gives to a movie for how conventional it feels is mostly left up to you. And for most part, I'd rather not hold the origin aspects against it, even though I deduct the points for familiarity. Overall, Mr. Doctor gets a 7 out of 10, with an 8 out of 10 in regards to the finale. That's a commentary, hope you enjoyed the rest of this gameplay, and Insanity is out.